All right, class, welcome back. This chapter, Culture and Social Structure, deals a lot with us as individuals, but how we work in larger society, in particular, the lens that we as different groups look through. As far as the key points of this chapter, I really want to emphasize how culture impacts our perceptions, explain how culture change and the terminology that goes along with that. Talk about structural conditions, in particular when we talk about class versus race, and also the issues of stratification and how that impacts groups as well. If you remember during the last video, there was a theory called symbolic interaction theory. In this theory, it talked about the way we build our world through symbols. We construct our reality. Each individual observes the world through their perceptions. And typically, the lens from which we view that is our culture. That is the perspective on how we see the world, rooted in culture. There is us, the individual, and outside of that is our culture, and outside of that is our environment, such as neighborhoods and cities and the state and even our nationality. So we have all of these things influencing our perspectives. And as individuals, what we do is we look through all of those things to see the world around us. What is culture? Culture is the values, attitudes, customs, beliefs, and habits shared by members of a society. This includes norms, the rules of conduct. For example, the norm in the US is to have clothes on when you go outside. But it also includes material culture, which includes physical objects created by the members of a society. This includes things such as vases. Another aspect is non-material culture, which consists of abstract human creations, and that can include values or folk religion or beliefs. For example, in the US, we value thinness as a standard of beauty. However, in Ghana, most people would consider American fashion models sickly and undesirable. This is an aspect of their non-material culture. There are just as many subcultures as there are racial, ethnic, and religious minorities. Subcultures are basically the cultures that are not a part of the dominant group within a society. And there are several types: ethnic subcultures, convergent subcultures, persistent subcultures. An ethnic subculture deals with the ongoing lifestyle and interaction patterns separate from the larger society that are based on religious or other cultural group membership. A great example of this would be gypsies or the Romani people, who group themselves based on their ethnic heritage. Persistent subcultures is a subgroup that never assimilates into main society. Some groups over time, such as the Irish or German people, slowly work their way into main society through the process of becoming a convergent subculture. Persistent subcultures never achieve this and choose to stay separated. You see this with many Native American tribes or even the Amish people within the United States. Another aspect of culture is the organized patterns and behaviors among the basic components of a social system. For example, no one has to tell you when you go into a classroom where to sit you know your position is in the desk and the teacher is behind the podium. That is because your culture has taught you what your relationship should be with the teacher. In fact, culture gives us a predictable social relationship to expect. The main way that we learn about culture is typically through language. In fact, linguistic relativity deals with how culture is infused into language. However, language itself may connote both intended and unintended prejudicial meanings. For example, when we say the line, "Man, you gypped me," we're really saying someone swindled us. But think about the word gyp. To gyp someone is really a reference to the gypsy population, and it is an insult towards them. Another example would be during the early 90s. A popular television show was the Power Rangers. If you look very closely at this photo, you can notice something very unique. The Power Rangers were actually color-coded. The Asian Ranger was in a yellow outfit, the girly Ranger was in a pink outfit, and the African American Ranger was in a black costume. This is another example of how words may reflect race and ethnic groups in a harmful way. Culture can help unify a group through shared beliefs and shared norms. However, it can be a source of conflict between different groups. Cultural differentiation are the differences between cultures that make one group distinguishable from another. The larger the differences, the more the group will tend to clash with another group. Structural differentiation is the status distinctions for different racial and ethnic groups entrenched within a social system. The caste system in India is an example of this, where ethnic identity is entrenched in a hierarchical system. You can also find a similar system in the United States during the Jim Crow era. But what about white culture? Does white culture exist? Many academics have debated over this question. Oftentimes, because many white groups are a part of the dominant group, it's easy to overlook the fact that they are a part of a culture or have their own culture. In America, much of our culture can be described as white culture because of European history. The next segment I would like to talk about is actually culture versus class and dealing with some of our social issues. First, let's talk about structural conditions. Structural conditions deal with the distribution of power and access to resources. There was a man by the name of Max Weber, and Max Weber basically stated that people have different life chances based on power, prestige, and the resources that they are born into. This is why I put the photo of the cake up. There is a hierarchy where some people are at the top and some people are at the bottom. Class or social ranking are people who share similar wealth. Think about the middle class. They would have a similar lifestyle because they have a similar wealth. In connection to ethnic and racial stratification, it deals with the life chances based on group membership. In what ways does a racial or ethnic group, or even a religious group, or age group, or gender group impact one's life chances? What about the inequality that happens in our society and how we distribute different rewards? Rewards such as jobs and education. During the early 1930s, a term was coined called the culture of poverty. It was a controversial viewpoint arguing the disorganization and pathology of lower class culture. It is a culture that self-perpetuates through cultural transmission. Even in the 1960s, there was a writer by the name of Oscar Lewis who said that family disintegration was a core cause of many social problems. Basically, that poor people had traits that kept their poverty going. However, it sparked a major debate within academia. Was the logic behind the culture of poverty simply blaming the victim? What about structural barriers, including different resources? What impact do those things have in our society? What is the role of cultural determinism? Are there certain things about a culture that can propel people forward or even hold them back? As a class on Blackboard, I want us to discuss and ask some hardcore questions. How well can newcomers establish themselves economically? Can culture have a function in our society? Or from a conflict perspective, what does society do to maintain inequality? Or even, what does a culture do? In fact, in America, based on where you are, what is your potential of moving up or down? Also known as occupational mobility. What is the ability of an individual to improve their job position no matter where they start from?